High above the gas swirls of Gliese 581G, aboard the orbital archive ship Lexicon's Reach, Zarex adjusted his ocular membrane to sharpen focus on the human hologram spinning mid-air. The figure, a bearded man clad in doublet and hose, his hands resting on a globe, rotated gently as Zarex narrated. This is Johan van Oldenbarnevelt, Dutch statesman, architect of the Union of Utrecht, an unlikely cornerstone of one of Earth's most efficient colonial enterprises. Efficient? Scoffed Cadet Harlan, her voice laced with disbelief. They were a nation the size of a crater lake, and they dared the world? Zarex's facial fronds flared, a sign of restrained amusement. Dared it? They mapped it, and then they sold it back to itself. He waved his limb, expanding the hologram. Dozens of trade routes crisscrossed the blue marble of Earth, lines glowing red, gold, and green. They all seemed to emanate from one spot, the marshy lowlands of Western Europe. Consider the context, Zarex said. The 16th century. Spain and Portugal dominate the seas. England is a flickering ambition. France is a mess of blood and idealism. Yet from beneath the floodgates of the North Sea, the Dutch emerge, independent, ruthless, and starving for trade. He let the timeline run. The hologram flared to life with warships, merchant vessels, and tall ships carving wake lines into every ocean. Floating above it all were 3 letters, VOC. Ah yes, your beloved acronyms, Harloon muttered. What's this one? Verenigde Oostindische-Compagnie, the Dutch East India Company, the world's first multinational corporation. Founded in 1602, the projection narrowed to a bustling port, Amsterdam. The skyline teemed with cranes, sails, and stone storehouses. Merchants shouted, clerks scribbled, and soldiers loaded cargo under the watch of a wooden lion crest. A cannon fired in the distance, ceremonial. They fused capitalism and conquest, Zarex said. They didn't just sell spice, they sold ownership. Paper slips, promises of profit, auctioned futures of distant kingdoms. The VOC was a weapon as sharp as any blade. In the hologram, ships set sail to Ceylon, Java, and the Moluccas. Each vessel bore the twin cross flags of the Netherlands, cutting through monsoon and piracy alike. Cities were built with straight streets, Protestant churches, and company laws. Where the Portuguese had burned and prayed, the Dutch weighed and taxed. Who leads them? Harloon asked, now visibly intrigued. Zarex zoomed in on a stern-faced man with a clipped beard and cold eyes. Jan Pieter Zoon Cohen, Governor-General of the Indies. Merciless, brilliant. He once wrote, "We cannot make war without trade, nor trade without war." Sounds human, Harloon muttered. That's the thesis, Zarex replied. Their size was deceptive. Their true weapon was system. They reduced the chaos of empire to ledgers and warehouses. Local rulers were not crushed, only undercut. The view shifted to Batavia, modern-day Jakarta. Neatly ordered canals echoed Amsterdam. Dutch soldiers in buff coats walked among Malay traders and Chinese artisans. Overhead, black smoke curled from forges beside spice warehouses. A city grown not from myth or majesty, but margin. They were tolerant when it suited profit. Cruel when profit was at stake, Zarex continued. Human adaptability, that is the anomaly. The scene dimmed, replaced by a quiet recording from Earth, static-laced in an ancient tongue. A Dutch merchant's diary translated, "We do not desire conquest, only access. But if a door does not open, we shall remove the hinges." Zarex turned back to Harloon. Now, consider this. While their armies rarely surpassed 30,000, their ships numbered in the hundreds. Their influence reached from Japan to Brazil, all achieved by a nation fighting to stay above sea level. Harlan gestured toward the recording. That mindset, it's not expansionist in the way we know. It's systemic predation. Elegant, terrifying. Zarex nodded. And it worked. A pause fell between them. broken only by the soft hum of the archive ship's reactor core. Then, Zarex stepped forward and tapped the interface. The globe morphed. Bright lines faded, replaced by a darker shade. Shadow crept over the Dutch colonial holdings. "Success breeds arrogance," he said, "and overreach. Even systems rot when fed on blood. Our next dive explores their contradictions, how tolerance gave way to cruelty, how trade became control, how the Dutch, masters of scale and subtlety, met the limits of their reach." He folded his limbs neatly. "But remember this, cadet. If you want to understand humanity's future among the stars, begin here, with a people who turned puddles into power, ships into empires, and strategy into survival." The ship adjusted orbit, sunlight slicing across the hologram. The globe spun once more, and the red trails of the Dutch Empire flickered like veins across an old and fading map. The archive ship's lights dimmed as the next projection flickered to life. This time, instead of charts and ships, the holoscape unfolded into the dense, humid jungles of the East Indies. Birds cried above thick canopies, and in the distance, the rhythmic clang of hammers echoed through the haze. Harloon leaned forward instinctively. Something felt different. At the center of it all stood Captain Willem Vos, a lean figure with a weathered face and a gaze that could measure silence. His uniform was stained from heat and distance, but his posture radiated command. Around him bustled Batavian guards and local conscripts alike, unloading muskets, surveying spice stores, and shuffling prisoners beneath tarps. Vos had been with the VOC since he was 16. The sea had raised him, war had forged him, and the company had claimed the pieces. But beneath his stoic discipline was a man slowly unraveling, thread by thread, as the machine he served grew hungrier. "What news from Banda?" he asked his second-in-command, a Javanese interpreter named Raka, whose loyalty was bought with silver and tested daily. Raka hesitated before responding. "The nutmeg harvest was light. Locals withheld tribute. You know what they fear." Vos didn't blink. "Then remind them." The conflict was never just about trade. It was about rhythm, control, a cycle of intimidation wrapped in contracts and sealed with wax. Yet with each turn, the boundaries blurred. Where influence once meant negotiation, it now meant force. The Dutch weren't merely traders. They had become architects of subjugation. But the resistance, too, had learned. One moonless night, a Dutch outpost burned in the Celebes. 30 soldiers slaughtered. The attackers vanished like smoke. It wasn't open rebellion, that would be suicidal, but precision defiance, targeted, rehearsed, and it stung. When word reached Batavia, Vos stood over the report, fists clenched. "They're learning from us." Raka studied him. "Isn't that what the company feared most?" The following week, an envoy arrived from Ternate, a prince draped in crimson, with eyes like tempered steel. He stood barefoot before the Dutch governor and presented not a tribute, but a petition. Freedom of internal trade, reduced tariffs, the right to govern his own markets. Vos watched the exchange from a shaded corner, his thoughts churning. The prince wasn't pleading. He was negotiating as an equal. That night, over spiced wine and soft lanterns, he wrote in his journal, "We gave them structure. Now they understand how to wield it." Meanwhile, storms brewed in Europe. Wars flickered across the continent, and with them came a tighter grip from Amsterdam. More shipments, more quotas, less patience. The VOC's once pragmatic policies turned rigid, even violent. Mercy was seen as weakness. Efficiency became doctrine. In the field, Vos felt the shift. Raids increased. Forts were reinforced. And behind it all, whispers of rebellion grew louder. He tried to temper it, to advocate restraint, but the new board members, wealthy, impatient, pushed for results, not diplomacy. Then came the Amboina incident. A group of English traders, rivals tolerated more out of necessity than goodwill, were arrested in a remote fort on accusations of espionage, tortured, then executed. It sent shockwaves through Europe, igniting a diplomatic firestorm. But within the colony, the message was simpler: loyalty or death. Voss hated it. He visited the prison afterward, walking among empty cells and blood-stained walls. The silence felt like a scream. Rocca found him there. "You taught them to fear you," he said, "but they also watched how you led. You think they won't remember that?" The question clung to Voss longer than any report. In a system built on numbers, he had once believed individuals still mattered, that even in empire, choices had weight. But as the spice flowed and the profits soared, the company no longer wanted captains. It wanted cogs. Still, resistance simmered. In Makassar, a coalition of local chiefs united. They called it a trade pact. But it was something more. Not a rebellion of swords, but of ideas. They bypassed Dutch tariffs. They sailed under independent flags, and they spoke in languages the company didn't yet understand. Voss stood before the council in Batavia, presenting the reports. His tone was calm, but his eyes betrayed the storm beneath. "If we crush them, we'll only delay the inevitable. We need allies, not subjects." One of the directors sneered. "You sound like them." Voss didn't flinch. "Maybe that's because I've listened." But there was no room for nuance. Orders were issued. Ships launched. Fire followed. That night he sat beneath the stars with Rocca, watching plumes of smoke rise along the horizon. "I can't stop it," he said softly, "but I can document it. The truth, at least." Rocca nodded. "Then do it. Let someone remember." As dawn crept over Batavia, the garrison marched once more. This time, Voss remained behind, not out of fear, but resolve. He opened his journal again. His hand shook, but he wrote anyway. "This is not empire. This is erosion, and we are the tide." The screen dimmed, leaving only silence aboard Lexicon's reach. Harlouen sat still, her mind spinning. "So," she said finally, "the conflict wasn't just conquest versus resistance. It was conscience versus control." Zareks nodded, voice low. "And the hardest battles were fought in silence, between duty and soul." The archive shifted. A new chapter prepared to unfold. The system was fraying, and beyond the burning ports, a reckoning was coming. The sun rose sluggishly over Batavia, casting long shadows across the fortified walls that had come to symbolize Dutch dominion in the East Indies. Captain Willem Voss stood on the ramparts, the cold morning air biting through his worn coat. Behind him, the city stirred, a restless mix of merchants, soldiers, and locals, each carrying the weight of an empire teetering on the edge. Reports had arrived overnight from Ambon. A coordinated uprising had erupted among the island's spice farmers and native militia. The carefully maintained facade of control was cracking, and Voss knew the delicate balance was about to shatter. Rocca approached quietly, his expression grave. "Captain, the coalition you warned about, they've struck harder than anticipated. The fort at Ambon is under siege." Voss clenched his jaw. "They've had enough of being pawns in a game they never agreed to play." For years, the Dutch East India Company had stretched its grasp across thousands of islands, trading spices, silks, and stories. But the relationships they forged were brittle, held together by fear and fragile alliances. Now, the indigenous leaders, once compliant or coerced, had tasted autonomy and refused to retreat. Voss thought back to the council meeting where he had pleaded for diplomacy, only to be dismissed as naive. The directors of the VOC had been clear. The empire's profits mattered above all else, and any threat was to be extinguished without hesitation. Yet here he was, torn between his orders and the humanity he glimpsed in the faces of those rising up. Rocca, ever the interpreter of both language and loyalty, whispered, "The company builds walls, but they don't see the cracks forming beneath their feet." As the sun climbed higher, Voss convened with his officers. The decision was swift. Reinforcements would be sent and any resistance crushed. But beneath the urgency was a silent question none dared voice. How long could this brittle peace endure? That night, beneath the flicker of lanterns in his quarters, Voss opened his journal. His hand moved with urgency, capturing the contradictions of empire, the hunger for control shadowed by the yearning for justice. "They call it civilization," he wrote. "But what is it when built on broken promises and shattered lives?" Suddenly, a messenger arrived, breathless and wild-eyed. "Captain, the rebels have taken the spice warehouse. They threaten to burn the entire stockpile." A cold shiver ran down Voss's spine. The spices were more than commodities. They were the lifeblood of the company's influence. To lose them would be catastrophic. He rose, the weight of command heavy upon him. "Then we move at dawn." The coming days were a blur of gunfire and strategy. Voss led the counterattack with grim resolve, the clash echoing through the dense jungle and narrow streets. Yet with each skirmish, the cost grew clearer. Lives lost on both sides, bridges burned that might never be rebuilt. Raka fought beside him, a living testament to the tangled loyalties that defined this conflict. "We are all prisoners here," he said once, bloodied but unbowed. "Prisoners of promises that weren't kept." When the smoke finally cleared, the warehouse lay in ruins, the rebel leaders captured or scattered. Victory tasted bitter. Voss stood amidst the ashes, knowing this was no triumph, but a pause. The rebellion had revealed the fractures beneath the empire's glittering surface. And somewhere beyond the horizon, new challenges awaited. Political tides shifting in Europe, rival powers eyeing the riches, and the restless spirit of those who refused to be silenced. As he gazed at the darkened sky, Voss whispered to himself, "The true battle is not for spice or land, but for the soul of a nation struggling to be free." The story was far from over, and in the quiet moments before dawn, a single truth emerged. Empires fall not just to armies, but to the unyielding will of those who dare to dream beyond chains. The archive's lights dimmed once more, leaving Harloon and Zarix deep in thought, poised on the precipice of the next revelation.